That rainy night, I walked into a luxury hotel lobby with no suitcase, only a soaked coat, and nowhere else to go. The staff glanced at me and smirked. "Sir, people like you can't afford this place." I stayed quiet. My wife's lies had already made them believe I had lost everything. Then the manager said, "We were told not to accommodate you." Before he could throw me out, the head of security rushed over, lowered his head, and placed a black key card in my hand. "I've waited 6 years to return this, sir." The manager saw it and turned pale. "You have no idea how much it means that you are still here." Before we continue, leave a comment below. Where are you watching from? Your city, your country, and I read every single one. Quick note. This story contains fictional elements added for entertainment and educational purposes. Similarities to any names or places are purely coincidental, but the message inside it, that one is for you. The lobby of the Grand Pinnacle smelled the way old money always smells: polished wood, fresh flowers, and something faintly warm underneath it all, like a fireplace that had been burning since morning. I had walked through hundreds of hotel lobbies in my life. I had owned 7 of them at one point. But there is something different about walking into a building you saved when no one else would, wearing clothes that make the bellman glance at your empty hands and then look away. A young man in a burgundy uniform near the entrance moved to intercept me out of habit, the way hotel staff are trained to assess arriving guests in the first 3 seconds. His name tag read Tommy. Tommy Wexler. I would learn later had worked the door at the Grand Pinnacle for 6 years and prided himself on reading people accurately. He looked at my coat. He looked at my hands. He stepped back and let me pass without offering to carry anything, because there was nothing to carry. I did not take it personally. I had spent 40 years learning how to read rooms, and I understood exactly what Tommy saw: a man in his 60s, alone, underdressed for the weather, and underdressed for the hotel, walking in from the rain, without luggage. In any lobby in America, that picture tells a specific story. It is rarely the correct one. I crossed the marble floor toward the front desk. The string quartet I had heard from outside was stationed near the bar entrance to my left. 4 musicians in black working through something slow and classical that floated above the conversations of the guests seated nearby. A couple near the fireplace was sharing a bottle of wine, laughing at something the woman had just said. A businessman in a gray suit was studying his phone with the focused unhappiness of someone reading bad news. The lobby was perhaps 2/3 full, the quiet hum of a Tuesday night in February at a hotel that had learned how to stay full even in the slow season. Behind the front desk, there were 2 staff members on duty. One was a young man with his back partially turned, working through something on a secondary terminal. The other was a woman in her late 20s, dark blazer hair pulled back with the kind of precision that suggested she took her presentation seriously. Her name tag read Cassidy. Cassidy Holbrook had been working the front desk at the Grand Pinnacle for 2 years, and from the way she carried herself, she clearly believed she was very good at her job. In certain respects, she was right. She looked up as I approached. Her smile was the professional kind, the one that hotels train into their staff during orientation week, wide enough to be welcoming, but controlled enough to remain neutral. Then her eyes moved across me the way a scanner moves across a barcode, quick and automatic, taking inventory. The smile did not disappear. It simply became a different kind of smile. Smaller, cooler. The kind that says, "I will be polite, but I have already decided what I think." "Good evening," she said. "How can I help you?" "I need a room," I said. "One night, possibly 2. She turned to her screen and began typing. "Do you have a reservation with us?" "I don't." Her fingers paused for just a fraction of a second. "I see. And what name would the reservation be under if you were to book with us tonight?" "Westfield," I said. "Conrad Westfield." She typed the name, looked at the screen. typed something else. Her expression did not change, but there was a quality in the pause that followed a half-second too long that told me she had found nothing and was now making a decision about how to proceed. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Westfield," she said, and her voice had taken on that particular tone that hospitality professionals use when they are about to say no in the most pleasant possible way. "We are fully booked tonight. I'm afraid we don't have any availability." I studied her face. "The system shows every room occupied." "Yes, sir. We have a corporate conference in-house through Thursday, and we've been at full capacity since last week." "And the presidential suite on the 34th floor?" I asked. "Is that occupied as well?" Something shifted in her expression. The smallest contraction around her eyes, the kind that happens when a question lands somewhere unexpected. She typed again, more deliberately this time. "That suite is permanently reserved," she said. "It's not available for general booking." "I'm aware," I said. "I'm asking whether it's currently occupied." She looked up from the screen. Her chin lifted very slightly, the way a person's chin lifts when they are drawing a boundary they intend to hold. "Sir, that suite is a special designation. It falls outside our standard inventory. I'm not able to make any arrangements regarding that room, and I would not be authorized to do so regardless of availability." My jaw tightened. Not from anger, not yet, but from the particular frustration of being spoken to as though I were a man who had wandered in off the street and was now reaching for something that did not belong to him. I breathed through it. "I understand your policy," I said carefully. "What I'm asking is a direct question. Is the suite currently occupied by a guest?" "I'm not able to share the occupancy status of that room, sir." I put both hands flat on the counter. Not aggressively, just to ground myself because my chest had started doing the thing it does when I am holding back more than I want to hold back, a tightening that starts just below the sternum and climbs if I let it. "Cassidy," I said, reading her name tag and using it the way you use a person's name when you want to remind them that you are both human beings in the same room. "I have been traveling since early this morning. I would like a room. If you cannot provide the presidential suite, then I would like any available room in this hotel, whatever is open." She looked at me for a moment, and I could see the calculation happening behind her professional composure. Then she said with a sympathy that did not reach her eyes, "Mr. Westfield, as I mentioned, we are fully booked. I would be happy to recommend several nearby properties that may have availability tonight. The Langham is about 4 blocks north, and the Intercontinental is just down the street. Both are excellent options." She was sending me away. Not because there were no rooms. I had built enough hotels to know that there are always rooms. There are rooms being held for late arrivals, rooms being withheld for VIP walk-ins, rooms in soft block that can be released with a single authorization code. She was sending me away because she had looked at me and made a decision, and now she was executing that decision with perfect professional composure. My throat felt tight. Not from humiliation, though there was some of that. Mostly from something older and harder to name, the feeling of being invisible in a place where I was more present than anyone in the room knew. I straightened up, rolled my shoulders back once, and said very quietly, "I'd like to speak with your manager." Cassidy's hand moved toward the phone on her desk, smooth and unhurried, the gesture of someone who had made this call before and was not concerned about making it again. "Of course," she said. "One moment." He came from a corridor behind the front desk, walking with the particular stride of a man who has been interrupted from something he considered more important. Brett Langley was the night manager of the Grand Pinnacle, a title he wore the way some men wear expensive watches, not because they need to tell time, but because they need other people to notice. He was somewhere in his early 40s, medium build, with the kind of groomed appearance that takes genuine effort to maintain, and the kind of expression that makes you understand immediately why that effort is entirely wasted. He straightened his jacket as he walked, a small adjustment that was entirely unnecessary, but served its purpose. It was a gesture of authority, a way of saying, "I am the person in charge here," before a single word had been exchanged. He stopped at the desk, placed one hand on the counter, and looked at me the way a man looks at a problem he has already solved in his head. "Good evening," he said. "I'm Brett Langley, night manager. I understand you have a question about availability." "Not a question," I said. "A request. I need a room for the night, and I've been told the hotel is fully booked. I'd like to understand whether that's accurate." Brett glanced at Cassidy's screen from his position beside her. A quick sideways look that told me he had already been briefed on the situation before he walked out. He knew exactly who was standing in front of him and had already decided how this conversation was going to end. "I've reviewed the system," he said smoothly. "Ms. Holbrook is correct. We're at full capacity through Thursday due to a corporate event. I do apologize for the inconvenience. We'd be glad to assist you with a referral to another property in the area." "I asked about the presidential suite," I said. Brett's expression shifted. Not dramatically, but enough. A slight tightening around the jaw, the way a man's jaw tightens when a conversation moves into territory he prepared for but hoped to avoid. "That suite carries a special designation," he said. "It's reserved on a permanent basis and is not available to walk-in guests under any circumstances." "Reserved for whom?" I asked. "That information is confidential." I looked at him steadily. "Brett, I'm going to ask you something directly, and I'd appreciate a direct answer. Has anyone from Westfield Group Management contacted this hotel in the past 30 days with instructions regarding how to handle my arrival?" The question landed like a stone dropped into still water. Brett's hand on the counter pressed down slightly, the knuckles shifting, and for just a moment something moved across his face that was not quite guilt, but was close enough to its cousin to be recognizable. "I'm not sure what you're implying," he said, his voice still smooth, but carrying a new edge underneath the smoothness, the way a polished floor carries a crack you only see when the light hits it from the right angle. "I'm not implying anything," I said. "I'm asking a factual question. Has anyone contacted this hotel with instructions about me?" "Our guest relations communications are confidential, sir." That was not a denial. I had sat across from enough attorneys and executives in my life to know the difference between a man who says no and a man who says something that sounds like no but contains no actual negation. Brett Langley had just confirmed everything I needed to know without saying a single word that could be quoted against him. My chest tightened. The feeling was not unfamiliar. It was the same one I had felt standing in the lobby of Westfield Tower, watching my keycard blink red, but it carried a new dimension tonight. Because this hotel was different. This building was different. And the fact that Vivian's reach had extended here into this specific place told me that she understood exactly what the Grand Pinnacle meant to me, even if she did not know why. "I see," I said. My voice came out lower than I intended, rougher at the edges. "So the answer is yes." "The answer is that I cannot discuss our communications with third parties," Brett said. And now there was something almost satisfied in his delivery, the satisfaction of a man who believes he is winning a conversation on a technicality. Behind him, I noticed that the young man who had been working at the secondary terminal had stopped working. He was holding very still, his eyes moving between Brett and me, with the careful attention of someone who senses that the ground beneath a conversation is less stable than it appears. I would not learn his name until later, but I would remember his face, the face of a person who knows something is wrong and is waiting to see what the right thing to do might be. "All right?" I said. I straightened up again, pressed my hands together in front of me the way I do when I am organizing my thoughts and do not want my hands to do anything my thoughts have not authorized. "Let me tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to sit in that chair by the fireplace." I nodded toward the seating area at the center of the lobby, a cluster of deep leather chairs arranged around a low table. "I'm going to sit there for a few minutes, and if the situation changes, I would appreciate it if someone came to let me know." Brett's eyes narrowed very slightly. Sir, if you are not a registered guest. I'm not causing a disturbance, I said, cutting him off cleanly. I'm sitting in a hotel lobby. That is not a crime in the state of Illinois. He wanted to say something else. I could see it in the way his mouth stayed slightly open for a half second after I finished speaking, the words queued up and then reconsidered. Whatever authorization he had been given regarding me, it apparently did not extend to having me physically removed from a public area without cause. Of course, he said finally. The same professional composure Cassidy had used, stretched a little thinner. Let me know if you need anything. I turned and walked toward the fireplace. The leather chair was deep and warm, and when I sat down, the cushion exhaled softly beneath my weight. I leaned back and looked up at the ceiling, at the painted scenes of Chicago history stretching across the plaster. The Great Fire, the World's Fair, the lakefront in summer. And I thought about the fact that I had been the reason this ceiling still existed. My throat ached. Not from sadness, exactly. From the particular weight of a man who has done something significant in secret, and then has to watch other people claim the room as if it belongs entirely to them. Across the lobby, Brett murmured something to Cassidy. She nodded. And then Brett walked back toward the corridor he had come from, pulling out his phone as he went. He was making a call. I already knew who he was calling. And I knew that the moment that call connected the clock on everything was going to start moving very differently than Brett Langley expected. The leather chair by the fireplace was deep and warm, and I let it hold me for a moment, not out of comfort, but out of necessity. My chest was doing the thing it does when I hold too much, too quietly, a steady pressure that starts below the sternum and climbs if I give it room. I looked around the lobby. The couple near the bar had gone. The businessman had closed his laptop and moved on. What remained was the ordinary late-night population of a well-run hotel, a family checking in with two young children who were too tired to walk properly. A pair of women in business attire speaking quietly over the last of their drinks, a bellman moving a luggage cart with practiced efficiency. Nobody was looking at me. That was not unusual. I had spent years learning to occupy rooms without drawing attention. A skill that wealth teaches you in reverse first. You learn how to fill a room, and then, if you are paying any attention at all, you learn how to disappear inside one. The fire crackled steadily. Outside, the rain continued its work against the windows. I heard footsteps approaching from my left. Not rushed, not hesitant. The footsteps of a man who has learned to move through spaces with intention. He was broad through the shoulders, somewhere in his mid-50s, with close-cropped gray hair and the face of someone who had spent enough years managing difficult situations that calm had simply become his resting expression. His uniform identified him as hotel security. His name tag read, Franklin Greer, Head of Security. He was carrying 2 cups of coffee, one in each hand, and he stopped 4 feet from my chair and looked at me with an expression that was not the expression of a security officer approaching an unregistered guest. It was the expression of a man who had been waiting for this exact moment. "Mr. Westfield," he said. Low, even the voice of a man who does not need volume to carry weight. "I wondered when you'd come back." I studied his face carefully. "You know who I am." "Yes, sir." He extended one of the cups. "Black, no sugar. I'm guessing, but I've read enough about you to feel confident about it." I took the cup. The warmth moved up through my palms and into my fingers in a way that was disproportionate to what a cup of coffee should deliver, the way small physical comforts become significant when everything larger has gone cold. Franklin settled into the chair across from me unhurried, as though sitting down with the anonymous benefactor of the hotel he had spent 6 years protecting was a perfectly ordinary Tuesday evening. "About 2 years," he said before I could ask. "I started pulling public records on the LLC holding the suite reservation. Took me a while. Whoever structured that entity knew what they were doing. But the trail led back to a registered agent in Delaware, and from there to a corporate address." He paused. "Westfield Tower, 42nd floor. You never said anything, I said. It wasn't my place, he said simply. The agreement was that the suite stays reserved for the silent guardian. My job is to honor that agreement, not discuss it. He wrapped both hands around his own cup. Though when Mr. Harrelson asks me every 6 months whether the guardian has ever come, it gets harder to keep a straight face. Despite everything, the tightness in my chest, the rain outside, Brett Langley making his phone call somewhere in the back of this building, something loosened in me. Not relief. The particular sensation of being seen by someone who has no agenda attached to the seeing. Brett received instructions 3 days ago, I said, an email telling him to keep me out. Franklin's jaw tightened. He set his cup down with deliberate care. I know about it. Came from a third-party legal representative. Flagged your name, included a photograph, requested that you be informed of no availability, and asked to leave if necessary. He met my eyes directly. I was not consulted, and I will not enforce it. My throat went tight in a different way than before. The way it goes tight when something decent happens in the middle of a long stretch of things that have been neither decent nor indecent, but simply painful. Franklin reached into his jacket and produced a card. Matte black, slightly heavier than it looked, with a small embossed compass rose in the lower right corner that I recognized because I had designed it myself in 2019. The original access card, sealed with the trust documents, forwarded to the hotel to be held until the guardian arrived. My hand was not entirely steady when I reached for it. I've been keeping it in the security safe, Franklin said. Waiting. I closed my fingers around the card and held it. There's something I need to do before I go upstairs, I said. I need Brett Langley to understand something, and I need the lobby to hear it. The corner of Franklin's mouth moved, not quite a smile, but close enough to recognize. Then I think we should do that right here. He stood. I stood. The card was in my hand, and the fire was warm at my back, and for the first time since I had come through that revolving door, I did not feel like a man standing alone in a building that had moved on without him. Whatever Brett Langley was saying on that phone, his time was almost up. Brett came back 4 minutes later, and the man who walked out of that corridor was not the same man who had walked into it. The surface was identical: pressed jacket, measured stride. The professional composure that hotel management programs teach in the first week. But underneath it, something had shifted. His shoulders sat higher and tighter, the way a man's shoulders set when he has just received instructions that have given him borrowed confidence. He had the look of someone who had been handed a weapon and was deciding how to use it. He saw me standing near the fireplace. He saw Franklin beside me. Something crossed his face when he registered Franklin's position, a quick recalculation, but he did not slow down. Mr. Westfield. His voice had lost its apologetic quality entirely. What remained was the flat tone of a man delivering a decision rather than a request. I've consulted with the hotel's legal representative. I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises. The lobby was not empty. A man checking in at the far end of the desk had turned to look. 2 women near the entrance had gone very still, the way people go still when they sense that something real is happening nearby. The young staff member at the secondary terminal had stopped pretending to work. On what grounds, I asked. You are not a registered guest, and you've been informed that we have no availability. Your continued presence is a man sitting by a fireplace, I said, which is not a crime in the state of Illinois. Brett's jaw tightened. Sir, I have the authority to ask non-guests to vacate when what? The heat was building behind my voice now, not from anger alone, but from the combination of anger and grief and the exhaustion of a man who has been patient through things that did not deserve patience. When someone calls you from outside this building and tells you to make sure a specific person doesn't get a room tonight, Brett's face went through several expressions he could not fully control. I don't know what you're referring to. I think you received an email 3 days ago from a third-party legal representative, I said. I think it included my name, a photograph, and instructions about my arrival. And I think the call you just made was to confirm those instructions still stand. I took one step toward him. Am I wrong? The two women near the entrance had leaned toward each other. Brett's eyes moved across the lobby with the panicked awareness of a man who has just realized his audience has been paying close attention. This is a private matter, Brett said, his voice dropping. I would ask that we discuss this elsewhere. No, I said. We stay right here. Franklin shifted his weight slightly to my left. He did not speak. He did not need to. The head of security, standing beside the man the manager was trying to remove, said everything that needed saying. Brett looked at Franklin with an expression containing a full paragraph of things he could not say aloud. Franklin, I need you to. Mr. Greer is exercising his professional judgment, I said, which is the only judgment exercised correctly in this building tonight. Something cracked in Brett's composure then. Not completely, but enough. Mr. Westfield, I am aware of your situation. There was something ugly in how he said it. The ugliness of a man using someone else's misfortune as a lever. Your executive authority has been suspended pending a federal investigation. Your accounts are frozen. You have no legal standing to make demands of this hotel or its staff. He paused, letting it settle. So I will ask you one final time politely to leave. The lobby went quiet. My chest felt like something heavy had been placed on top of it, pressing down on every breath. Everything Brett said was technically true. My authority was suspended. My accounts were frozen. On paper, I was a man with no standing, but paper has never been the whole story. I reached into my coat and drew out the black card, held it at chest height between two fingers where Brett could see it clearly. His eyes went to the card. Something happened in his face that had not been there before. Not confusion exactly, but the expression of a man whose instincts are telling him loudly that he should recognize the object in front of him, even though he cannot explain why. What is that? He asked. The reason I'm here tonight, I said. I did not move toward the desk. I simply held the card there and watched the confidence Vivian's phone call had lent him develop a visible crack down its center. Behind Brett, the young staff member at the secondary terminal had pulled up something on his screen and was staring at it with an expression that had shifted from curious to something considerably more complicated. I tucked the card back into my pocket and looked at Brett with the full attention of a man who has been waiting 4 months for this exact moment. Get Mr. Harrelson, I said, and Catherine Mosley, both of them, now. Brett opened his mouth, closed it. Get them, I said, or I walk to that desk, use this card, and everyone in this lobby watches what happens without any context that might have made this easier for you. 3 full seconds. I watched him calculate the distance between the authority he believed he had and the authority he actually had, and arrive at an answer he did not like. He reached for his phone. His hand was not entirely steady. Before we go any further, if you are still with me right now, drop the number 34 in the comments. That is the floor where everything is about to change. I want to know you are still in this room with me. A gentle note. The story ahead contains fictional elements crafted for entertainment and education. It may not reflect events exactly as they occurred, and if that is not the kind of content you are looking for, this is a perfectly good place to stop. The elevator at the Grand Pinnacle moved slowly, the way elevators in old buildings move, when they have been maintained with care rather than replaced with efficiency. The interior was paneled in dark walnut, with a brass handrail along 3 walls. Owen stood to my right, arms crossed over his chest, holding himself together through physical pressure. Catherine stood to my left, eyes on the floor indicator as the numbers climbed. The doors opened on the 34th floor. The corridor was narrow and warm, lit by amber wall sconces throwing soft light across dark carpet. At the far end, a single door. Suite 3401. No number on the door itself, just a small brass slot beside the handle. I walked the corridor slowly. Owen walked beside me and I could hear the slight irregularity in his breathing, the breathing of a man managing something large through deliberate effort. I pressed the black card against the slot. The door opened. Floor-to-ceiling windows ran the full northern wall, perhaps 40 feet across. And beyond them, Lake Michigan stretched into the darkness, the rain still coming down in long, silver curtains, the water catching city light and throwing it back in fractured pieces. The Chicago skyline curved away to the west, its lights blurred by rain into something softer than it ever managed on a clear night. My chest hurt. The good kind, if such a thing exists. The kind that comes from encountering something you made possible and finding it exceeded what you imagined. "Sir," Owen said from behind me, his voice barely above a murmur, "please, come in." I stepped inside. Owen moved to stand beside me at the windows. For a long moment, neither of us spoke because what was happening between us was not a conversation. It was a recognition. The man who saved something and the man who was saved by it standing together in the room that had been the quiet center of that agreement for 6 years. Then Owen said, "Why?" His voice was rough and direct, the question of a man who has waited too long to dress it up in politeness. "Why anonymous?" I looked at the rain on the glass. "In 2019, I had been running the Westfield Group for 22 years, I said. My name was on buildings, on awards, on lobby plaques. And I had spent 22 years watching what happens to people when they know you have money. The way they look at you changes. The way every interaction gets measured against what you might be worth to them." I turned to look at Owen. "When I heard you were looking for help, I came and stood on the sidewalk outside for 20 minutes. And I thought this building deserves to survive on its own merits. Not because of who saves it." Owen made a sound in his chest, low and unsteady. "The LLC was straightforward," I continued. "In Delaware, you can establish a company without publicly disclosing the beneficial owner. The investment moved in 2 installments with the sweet clause written in plain language. I told myself I might use the room someday." I pressed my fingers against the cool glass. But while everything was functioning normally, it felt wrong to use it. The anonymity only works if it's complete. "And then it changed anyway," Owen said quietly. "Without your consent." Yes, Catherine had moved to stand near the seating area, and when I looked at her, I could see the picture was largely assembled in her mind. "The email to Brett," she said. "It came from Preston Holloway's firm." "Yes," I said. Her expression went hard, in the way a competent person's expression goes hard when they realize they have been used as an instrument in something they did not consent to. "I was not informed of that email," she said, and the controlled fury in her voice was considerable. "Mr. Langley acted on external instructions without my knowledge or authorization. That's one of the things we need to address tonight," I said. I reached into my coat and removed my phone. On the screen was a document Audrey had sent me 2 hours earlier, 47 pages of financial records, communications, and legal filings assembled over 3 weeks. "I need this room," I said, "and about 4 hours. And in the morning I need to make a phone call I want both of you present for." Owen looked at the phone, then at my face. Then he nodded slowly, with the gravity of a man who understands he is being invited into something significant. "Whatever you need," he said. "This is your hotel tonight." Outside, rain kept falling over the lake, indifferent and steady. But standing in that room for the first time in 6 years, I felt something shift in the weight I had been carrying. Not gone. Not yet. But moving. By 11 o'clock, the suite had become a working room. Owen had arranged for a long table to be brought in from the meeting space down the corridor. Catherine had returned with 2 legal pads and a pot of coffee, carrying the focused expression of a woman who had decided that whatever was happening here mattered more than anything else on her calendar tonight. 47 pages of financial records covered the table in overlapping rows organized by date. Somewhere between page 9 and page 12, I had sent Audrey a text with the suite number. I had not planned to. My hands had decided before my caution could object. I had been staring at page 12 for several minutes when Franklin's voice came through from the corridor. "Mr. Westfield, your daughter is here." I crossed to the door. Audrey Westfield was 34 years old, with my height, and her mother's eyes dark, direct, the kind that begin solving a problem before the rest of the face has finished registering that one exists. She wore a dark coat over a gray suit briefcase in one hand, a second bag over her other shoulder that I recognized as the one she used when carrying more documents than her briefcase could hold. She had driven 40 minutes from her office on West Monroe Street, and the drive showed in the tightness around her eyes. She looked at my face. Then her chin dropped slightly, and she stepped forward and put both arms around me, briefcase still in hand, holding on with the grip of a person who has been frightened for someone and is only now in the physical reality of their presence releasing the fear. "You should have told me where you were going," she said against my shoulder. "I needed to do the first part alone," I said. She pulled back, blinked hard, and reassembled herself into the version the room required. "Audrey Westfield," she said, looking past me toward Owen and Catherine. "Conrad's daughter and former chief legal officer of Westfield Group. I've been conducting an independent investigation for 3 weeks. What I've found is in this bag." She began removing documents with the efficiency of someone who has been rehearsing this moment during a 40-minute drive through February rain. These were the physical originals, the source documents she had photographed and sent ahead 2 hours earlier. Seeing ink on paper with real signatures made everything more solid. "Before we go through the files," I said carefully, "I need to ask you something directly. When the freeze order came through, when you saw the documents alleging the offshore transfers, did you believe them?" She stopped arranging papers and looked at me. A full 3 seconds passed. "For 11 days, she said. "Yes." My chest tightened. "The documents were delivered through a certified legal channel," she continued, her voice precise and unemotional. "They carried authenticated digital signatures, a chain of custody from a recognized forensics firm, and account statements that matched our internal banking templates exactly." Her jaw tightened. "Whoever prepared them had inside access. They knew our document formats, our signatory protocols, our internal reference numbering. It was not careless work." "Preston Holloway," I said, "with access provided by Vivian." "Yes. She had full viewing rights to our document management system as co-executive trustee. She used those rights over 8 months to copy templates and build forgeries designed to survive initial scrutiny." Audrey's hands pressed flat on the table. "I believed them for 11 days because I was supposed to believe them. They were built specifically for me." "What changed?" Catherine asked quietly. "Reference number 7-alpha-2291, Audrey said. "It appeared on 3 forged transfer documents as an internal authorization code. I recognized it because I had generated that code myself 14 months earlier for a domestic acquisition in Phoenix. That code had no business appearing anywhere near an offshore transfer record." She looked at me, and her composure had a hairline fracture running through it. "The moment I saw it, I understood. Someone had pulled codes from old archived records to populate the forgeries. The only person with that level of access besides you and me was Vivian." I walked around the table and stood beside her, not to take over the presentation, because my daughter had spent 11 days believing her father was a criminal, and I needed to be closer to her than a conference table's length allowed. "Audrey." My voice came out rough. "Taking 11 days to examine the evidence before you trusted your instincts is not a failure. That is exactly what a good lawyer does." Her chin dropped again. 1 breath. 2. Then she looked up with the firmness of a woman who has decided this is not the moment for the full weight of what she is feeling. "We can talk about that later. Right now, I need to show you what's in this bag." She produced a thick manila folder and set it on the table. "Wire fraud, under federal law, requires proof of a scheme to defraud use of electronic communication in furtherance of that scheme and intent. What I have here satisfies all three elements. She opened the folder. Inside printed email chains, account statements, time-stamped transaction records. The emails between Vivian and Preston document the scheme explicitly. The wire transfers used to move forged documentation are electronic communications in furtherance of the scheme. 8 months of preparation. She tapped the folder. Intent will not be a difficult argument. Owen leaned forward, reading glasses on, studying the top page with the attention of a man who has stopped being a bystander. Owen leaned back in his chair and looked at the rain on the glass. We had everything we needed. Tomorrow morning, Special Agent Rourke would have it all. Outside, the rain had softened to a steady murmur against the glass. We had everything. Tomorrow morning, Special Agent Rourke would have it all. Vivian had perhaps 7 hours left. Midnight passed without any of us marking it. The coffee pot had been refilled twice. Catherine's legal pads were covered in her precise handwriting, 3 pages organized by date and category. Owen had removed his reading glasses twice to rub his eyes, the gesture of a man who is tired, but has decided tiredness is not a relevant variable tonight. Audrey and I were working through the email records side by side, and the picture they assembled was one of the ugliest things I had ever seen. Not because of the legal exposure, not because of the financial scale, but because of the language. The casual, almost cheerful language of 2 people discussing the destruction of someone's life, the way other people discuss travel plans. The earliest email was dated June 14, 2023. Preston to Vivian. 11 words. The timing is right. Conrad is distracted. Let's talk this week. I read that sentence 3 times. June 2023. 14 months before the freeze order. 14 months of planning conducted in my own home by a woman who had handed me coffee every morning and asked about my day. My jaw ached from the pressure I was putting on it. Dad. Audrey's hand came down on my forearm, firm and warm. Stay with me. Don't go into it. I'm with you, I said. My voice came out rougher than intended. I mean it. She turned to look at me directly, her dark eyes doing something more than solving now. They were watching me with the careful attention of a daughter who knows exactly where her father goes when the pain gets ahead of the thinking. The emails are evidence. Tonight we use them. We feel them later. I breathed in through my nose, pressed my palms flat on the table. Continue, I said. Audrey turned back to the documents. By October 2023, they had identified the mechanism, she said, her lawyer's voice fully engaged. Preston had a contact at a financial forensics firm in Atlanta, a man named Garrett Wills, who had done legitimate work for 3 of Preston's real estate clients. Preston approached Wills with a private arrangement. $400,000 to produce transfer records that would withstand initial legal scrutiny. She slid a page toward me. Wills accepted. He used templates Vivian had been copying from our document management system and forwarding to Preston's personal email over 6 months. Catherine leaned forward. She forwarded them without triggering alerts. Her co-executive trustee credentials gave her read access without generating activity flags, Audrey said. The system assumed trustee access was authorized by definition. Reasonable design for a functioning marriage. A vulnerability the moment it stopped. Owen pressed both hands on the table. She used the trust your company placed in her against the company itself. Against my father specifically, Audrey said. The freeze order named him individually. The goal was not to destroy Westfield Group. The goal was to remove Conrad from it, discredit him personally, and position Vivian as the injured party in a divorce that would follow the criminal investigation. I looked at the ceiling for a moment, breathed through it. She was never planning to stay married, I said. The words came out flat, worn smooth by the distance they had traveled to reach the surface. No. Audrey's voice went quieter. The divorce filing was already drafted. Our investigator found it in Preston's document system, dated September 2023, 3 months after the first email. She hesitated for just a fraction of a second. The settlement terms awarded Vivian 63% of the marital estate. Catherine made a sharp sound. Owen said something under his breath. 63%. I looked at the rain on the windows and thought about 31 years reduced to a percentage calculated somewhere between the first email and the drafted divorce papers, while I was still refinishing floors and arguing about paint colors and believing in ordinary Tuesdays. Audrey, I said, bringing my eyes back down, the FBI contact. She straightened a fresh set of documents. 10 days ago, I met with Special Agent Daniel Rourke, FBI Financial Crimes. I presented the email chain, the forged documents, and the reference code discrepancy. Rourke's team spent 5 days on independent verification. 3 days ago, he confirmed the investigation had sufficient basis to proceed. She looked at me steadily. The FBI opened a formal case. Wire fraud and conspiracy. Both federal charges. What does Rourke need from us tonight? I asked. Audrey produced a single clean sheet, a list of 12 items. This. Authenticated originals with chain of custody documentation ready for Rourke's team at 8 tomorrow morning. She looked at the table. We have 9 of the 12. We need 3 more. Outside, the rain had softened to a quiet murmur against the glass, the sound of a city settling into the deepest part of its night. We had work to do, and Vivian had perhaps 6 hours left. Before I show you what was inside those emails, before I reveal the exact words 2 people used to plan the destruction of everything I had built, comment the word truth below. Because what you are about to hear is the part most people never get to see. Quick note: portions of this story include fictional elements shaped for educational purposes and storytelling. If you would prefer not to continue, there is no obligation, but if you stay, I promise it will be worth it. By 2 in the morning, the table had become a different kind of place. The email chain was behind us now, organized, labeled, filed. What remained in front of Audrey and me were the financial records, the actual movement of money, the wire transfers, the account statements that Garrett Wills had engineered to resemble Westfield Group's internal documentation. Catherine had stopped writing and was simply reading her glasses on, working through each page with the attention of a woman who has decided that understanding every detail matters more than sleep. Owen had not left. I had expected him to excuse himself hours ago, but he sat at his end of the table with the quiet stubbornness of a man who has decided that whatever is happening in this room is more important than his schedule. Walk me through the money, I said to Audrey. Not the documents, the actual transfers. She pulled a specific folder and opened it flat. Preston moved $400,000 to Garrett Wills in 3 installments, she said. The first was wired from a holding account registered to a shell company, Preston-controlled Harbridge Consulting, LLC, incorporated in Nevada in 2021. The second and third came from a personal account at a private bank in the Cayman Islands. She tapped the page. Every transfer used electronic wire. Every one is a separate count of wire fraud. How many counts total? Owen asked. Across the full scheme, the payments to Wills, the electronic transmission of forged documents to the forensics firm, the email communications coordinating the conspiracy. Audrey paused briefly. Rourke's team has identified 14 discrete electronic communications in furtherance of the scheme. 14 potential counts. Catherine set her glasses down. 14 counts of wire fraud, she said, at 20 years maximum per count. Nobody said anything for a moment. The number sat on this table between us, the way large numbers sometimes sit too large for the room to absorb, immediately requiring a few seconds before it becomes real rather than theoretical. My jaw tightened. Not from anger, from the particular sensation of watching a plan that had been building for 18 months finally reveal its full dimensions. "Audrey," I said, "the FBI contact. Walk me through it." She straightened a fresh set of documents. 10 days ago, I met with Special Agent Daniel Rourke of the FBI's Chicago Field Office Financial Crimes Division. I presented the email chain, the forged documents, and the reference code discrepancy. Rourke's team spent 5 days on independent verification, confirming chain of custody running forensic analysis on document metadata, tracing the payment to Wills. She looked at me steadily. 3 days ago, Rourke confirmed the investigation had sufficient basis to proceed. The FBI opened a formal case under wire fraud and conspiracy statutes. 18 U.S.C. 1343, I said. And 371, Audrey added. Both federal charges. Preston's exposure is higher because he initiated and coordinated the scheme. Vivian's is lower, but still substantial. "What does Rourke need from us tonight?" I asked. Audrey produced a single clean sheet, a list of 12 items. Authenticated originals with chain of custody documentation ready for Rourke's team at 8 tomorrow morning. She looked at the table. "We have 9 of the 12. We need 3 more." "Which 3? "The original investment agreement for this hotel," she said, looking at Owen. "To establish the LLC exists independently of the Westfield Group estate." Owen was already on his feet. "In my office safe, that I'll get it now. The second item is the server backup from Westfield Group's document management system," Audrey continued. "You told me you had it transferred off-site before the freeze." "It's with Raymond Albright," I said. "I'll call him at 7. He can have it to Rourke's team by 9. Audrey stared at me. "You backed up the system before the freeze." 6 months before. Her eyes searched my face. "You knew something was coming." I reached for my coffee cup. It was cold, but I drank it anyway. "I noticed things," I said. "Access patterns that didn't match normal usage. A reference in one of Preston's emails to a deal he said was in early stages, but our records showed had already closed. The way Vivian started asking questions about the trust structure she had never shown interest in before." I set the cup down. I didn't know what I was seeing, but I knew enough to protect the record. Audrey's eyes went bright at the edges. She did not blink it back immediately this time. "The third item," I asked gently. "A signed statement from Franklin Greer," she said, "documenting the email instruction directing the hotel to deny you access. An additional overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy charge." I turned toward the door. "Franklin." The door opened immediately. Franklin crossed the room and placed a folded sheet in front of Audrey. "Already done," he said. "I wrote it an hour ago." Audrey unfolded it, read it, looked up at Franklin with unguarded surprise. "This is thorough," she said. 30 years in security," Franklin said simply. "I know what a statement needs." Outside, the rain had softened to a quiet murmur. We had 12 items. Tomorrow morning, Special Agent Rourke would have them all. And somewhere across the city, Vivian was still asleep. She had perhaps 7 hours left. "The original investment agreement for this hotel," she said, and looked at Owen. "We need it to establish that the LLC exists independently of the Westfield Group estate, so that the freeze order cannot be retroactively applied to tonight's access. Rourke wants it to preempt any argument that Conrad violated the freeze by using the suite." Owen was already on his feet. "I have it in my office safe. I'll get it right now." "The second item," Audrey continued, "is the server backup from Westfield Group's document management system, the one that preserved the original unaltered records before Vivian began copying templates." She looked at me. "You told me you had it transferred off-site before the freeze." "It's with Raymond Albright," I said. Raymond Albright had been my outside counsel for 18 years, a man I trusted completely, and who had at my quiet instruction 6 months before the freeze order made a complete backup of the group's document system and stored it on an independent server at his firm. I had not told Audrey about this. I had not told anyone. "I'll call him at 7 tomorrow morning. He can have it to Rourke's team by 9. Audrey stared at me. Her lips parted slightly. "You backed up the system before the freeze," she said slowly. 6 months before. 6 months before, actually. Her eyes searched my face. "You knew something was coming." I reached for my coffee cup. It was cold, but I drank it anyway because my hands needed something to do. "I noticed things," I said carefully. "Small things. Access patterns in the document system that didn't match normal usage. A reference in one of Preston's emails to a property deal that he said was still in early stages, but that our records showed had already closed. The way Vivian started asking questions about the group's trust structure that she had never shown interest in before." I set the cup down. I didn't know what I was seeing, but I knew enough to protect the record. Audrey was looking at me with an expression that was equal parts admiration and something that might have been the release of a tension she had been carrying for weeks. Her eyes went bright at the edges again, and this time she did not blink it back immediately. "The third item," I asked gently, giving her a moment to reassemble. She cleared her throat. "A signed statement from Franklin Greer," she said, documenting the email instruction he received 3 days ago directing the hotel staff to deny you access. "It establishes that the conspiracy extended to interfering with your access to an asset not covered by the freeze order, which is an additional overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy charge." I turned toward the door. "Franklin," I said, raising my voice just enough to carry through the suite's entrance. The door opened. Franklin had been in the corridor the entire time I was certain of it, stationed there, with the patient vigilance of a man who considers it his post until he is told otherwise. "Yes, sir," he said. "I need a written statement from you, tonight if possible." Franklin reached into his jacket pocket and produced a folded sheet of paper. He crossed the room and placed it on the table in front of Audrey. "Already done," he said. "I wrote it out an hour ago. I had a feeling it would be needed." Audrey unfolded the sheet. "Read it." Looked up at Franklin with an expression of pure, unguarded surprise. "This is," she started. "Thorough," Franklin said simply. "I've been in security for 30 years. I know what a statement needs to contain." Audrey looked down at the sheet again. Her hand pressed it flat against the table, the gesture of someone receiving something they did not know they needed until it arrived. "Thank you," she said, and her voice was not quite as steady as she intended it to be. Outside, the rain had softened from its earlier intensity to something quieter, a steady murmur against the glass, the sound of a city settling into the deepest part of its night. We had 12 items. Tomorrow morning, Special Agent Rourke would have them all, and somewhere across the city, Vivian was still asleep. She had perhaps 7 hours left. The light came slowly, the way February light always comes in Chicago. Not the clean arrival of sunrise, but a gradual lightening of the darkness, gray, becoming pale gray, becoming something that could almost be called morning if you were willing to be generous about it. I had not slept. I was not certain any of us had. The coffee pot had been empty for 2 hours, and no one had called down to replace it, because somewhere around 4 in the morning, the work had reached the kind of concentrated momentum that makes ordinary needs feel irrelevant. By 6:30, the table was organized. 12 documents, 12 items on Audrey's list, each one in a labeled folder. Each folder in sequence, the complete package that Special Agent Rourke had specified. Audrey had checked it twice against the list, and then checked it a third time because she is the kind of lawyer who checks things 3 times and considers the third check the minimum acceptable standard. Owen had fallen asleep in one of the armchairs near the window sometime around 3, and had woken at 6 with the slightly disoriented expression of a man who had not intended to sleep and was mildly embarrassed about it. Catherine had not slept at all. She had filled 4 legal pads and had begun a 5th working through implications for the hotel's operational position that I had not asked her to consider, but that she had considered anyway, because that was the kind of executive she was. At 6:58, I called Raymond Albright. Raymond picked up on the second ring, which told me he had been awake and waiting. He was 71 years old, had been practicing law in Chicago for 43 years, and had the unhurried telephone manner of a man who has handled enough crises to know that urgency and speed are not the same thing. "Conrad," he said, "I've been expecting your call." "The backup," I said. "Is it intact?" "Every file," Raymond said. "Untouched since the day you asked me to store it. I've had it on an air-gapped server at my firm since April 2024. No external access, no modifications, complete chain of custody documentation." A brief pause. "I can have it packaged and delivered to the FBI field office on West Roosevelt Road by 8:45. "Rourke's team will be there at 8, I said. "Tell them the backup is coming. Ask them to wait." "Already called," Raymond said, with the quiet satisfaction of a man who has anticipated a move and prepared for it. "Rourke knows. He's waiting for the full package before he moves." I exhaled. It was not a dramatic exhale, not the release of a man who has been holding his breath for months. It was the quiet, careful exhale of a man who has just confirmed that the last piece is in place and can now allow himself to know that what he built is going to hold. "Thank you, Raymond," I said. "Don't thank me," he said. "Just finish it." I set the phone down on the table. Audrey was looking at me from across the stack of folders, her coat back on her briefcase, repacked, her face carrying the particular quality of a person who has worked through the night and arrived on the other side of it with everything intact, but nothing to spare. "It's ready," I said. She nodded once. Then she reached into her briefcase and produced a separate folder thinner than the others and set it on the table between us. "There's one more thing," she said. "Before Rourke's team arrives, before we do anything else this morning." She looked at the folder rather than at me. "I need to show you something I found 2 days ago that I haven't told you about yet." The careful way she said it made the back of my neck tighten. "Show me," I said. She opened the folder. Inside was a single document, 2 pages with the header of a Chicago law firm I recognized, Hargrove and Pell, a mid-sized firm that handled primarily real estate and estate planning. The document was a property transfer agreement, dated November 18, 2024, 3 weeks after the freeze order. It transferred the deed to our house on North Burling Street from joint ownership to Vivian's name alone. My hands pressed flat on the table. "The freeze order covered corporate assets," Audrey said, her voice measured and careful, the voice of a doctor delivering a diagnosis to a patient they care about. "The house was held as personal marital property, not through the group. Vivian's attorneys argued that the freeze did not apply to it, and the court agreed on a temporary basis pending the divorce proceedings." She paused. "She transferred the deed 4 days after the ruling. 31 years. We had bought that house in 1993, the year after we married, when the neighborhood was still transitional, and the house needed more work than either of us had fully accounted for. I had refinished the floors in the front room myself over a series of weekends that first autumn, on my hands and knees with a rented sander, while Vivian painted the kitchen a color she called warm ivory, and I called the exact color of old paper, and we had argued about it cheerfully for 2 weeks before agreeing that we were both right. I looked at the transfer document for a long moment. Then I closed the folder. "Add it to the file," I said. My voice was flat. Not dead flat, the flatness of a man choosing not to feel the full weight of something in a room where there is still work to be done. "Rourke can use it to establish that she was taking additional steps to consolidate assets while the investigation was pending. It speaks to intent. Audrey reached across and picked up the folder. Her fingers were not entirely steady as she slid it into the sequence with the others. She understood what she had just shown me, and she understood what it cost, and she did not try to make it smaller or larger than it was. A knock at the suite door. Franklin's voice. "Mr. Westfield, 3 gentlemen are here. They say Ms. Audrey arranged for them to come." I looked at Audrey. "The shareholders," she said, with the precision she maintained even when tired. "The shareholders. Bernard Whitlock, Theodore Marsh, and Reginald Foss. They hold a combined 18% of Westfield Group's non-voting preferred shares. They are not board members and have no executive authority, which means the board's actions against you cannot bind them or speak for them." She straightened the folder stack one final time. "I contacted them 12 days ago. I showed them the preliminary evidence. They agreed to come." "Why here?" I asked. "Because every other meeting space we might have used is either under board oversight or within reach of Vivian's legal team," Audrey said. "This hotel is yours. This room is yours. And the conversation we are about to have is one that needs to happen somewhere that belongs to you." I crossed to the door and opened it myself. The 3 men in the corridor were all in their 60s or older, dressed for an early morning business meeting, carrying the careful composure of people who have come prepared for something serious. Bernard Whitlock was tall and thin, with the sharp, watchful eyes of a man who made his money in finance and has never entirely stopped assessing risk. Theodore Marsh was shorter, rounder, with the kind of open face that suggested he had chosen his investments based on people as much as numbers. Reginald Foss stood slightly apart from the other two, a compact man with silver hair and the steady bearing of a former military officer, which, as I would later confirm, he was. "Conrad," Bernard said. His voice was low and direct. "We came because Audrey asked us to, and because what she showed us made it impossible to stay away." He extended his hand. "For what it's worth, and I understand it may not be worth a great deal at this particular moment, not one of us believed it." My throat tightened. Theodore stepped forward and gripped my hand before Bernard had fully released it. "Not for a single day," he said firmly. And there was something almost fierce in the way he said it, the fierceness of a man who needs you to know that his loyalty did not waver. Reginald said nothing. He simply looked at me steadily, held my gaze for a full 3 seconds, and nodded once, the nod of a man for whom that gesture contains everything he considers worth saying. My chest ached with something that was not grief and not relief, but lived in the narrow space between them, the particular ache of discovering that you were not as alone as you believed yourself to be. "Come in," I said. "All of you. We have about 40 minutes before Rourke's team arrives." Behind me, through the suite's tall windows, the gray February morning was brightening by degrees over Lake Michigan, slow and inevitable, the way mornings come when the night has been long enough that you had almost stopped expecting them. Almost. Daniel Rourke arrived at 8:03, which told me something about him before he had said a single word. A man who arrives 3 minutes after the appointed time at a meeting of this significance is not a man who is careless about punctuality. He is a man who has learned that arriving exactly on time at sensitive locations creates a pattern that can be tracked, and that 3 minutes of deliberate variation is a small but meaningful form of operational discipline. He was in his mid-40s, medium height, with the kind of face that has been trained over years of investigative work to reveal as little as possible while absorbing as much as possible. He wore a dark overcoat over a gray suit, no tie, and carried a black bag that was neither large enough to be conspicuous nor small enough to be inadequate. 2 agents accompanied him, younger, similarly dressed, who positioned themselves near the suite entrance with the practiced unobtrusiveness of people whose job is to be present without being noticed. Franklin had brought Rourke up personally, bypassing the front desk entirely using the service elevator that accessed the 34th floor from the hotel's loading area on the east side of the building. It was a route that left no record in the standard guest management system, a detail Franklin had arranged without being asked, because Franklin Greer had spent 30 years in security, thinking about the details that other people forgot to think about. Rourke stepped into the suite, assessed the room in approximately 2 seconds, the table covered in organized folders, the 5 people arranged around it. The gray morning light coming through the tall windows, and then looked at me with the direct evaluative gaze of a man who has read a considerable amount about you and is now measuring the reading against the reality. "Mr. Westfield," he said, "Special Agent Daniel Rourke, FBI Financial Crimes. I appreciate you making this available." He looked at the table. "Is that the complete package?" 12 items, Audrey said, stepping forward. Audrey Westfield, former Chief Legal Officer of Westfield Group. Each item is labeled sequenced and accompanied by chain of custody documentation. The server backup from Raymond Albright's firm should reach your office by 8:45 p.m. Rourke looked at Audrey with an expression of professional respect that was entirely genuine. "Ms. Westfield, your preliminary submission 10 days ago is the reason we moved as quickly as we did." He paused. "That was thorough work under difficult circumstances." Audrey's jaw tightened briefly, the tightening of a person receiving recognition they have been working toward for 3 weeks and are not entirely certain how to accept. "Thank you," she said. "The circumstances made thoroughness necessary." Rourke moved to the table and began working through the folders with one of his agents, a methodical examination that was quiet and efficient and took approximately 12 minutes. The rest of us waited. Bernard Whitlock had taken a seat near the window and was watching the proceedings with the focused attention of a man who has spent a career assessing situations from the outside. Theodore Marsh had his hands wrapped around a coffee cup that Owen had arranged to appear seemingly from nowhere in the way of hotel owners who understand that people in difficult rooms need something warm to hold. Reginald Foss stood near the wall, arms crossed, the bearing of a man for whom standing is always preferable to sitting when the situation is serious. Owen was near the door. I noticed that he kept looking at me, not with the star-struck attention of earlier in the evening, but with something quieter and more considered, the look of a man recalibrating his understanding of the person standing in his hotel. Rourke closed the last folder. He straightened up and turned to face the room. "This is sufficient," he said. Not enthusiastically, not dramatically, with the measured certainty of a federal agent who chooses his words for precision rather than effect. "Combined with the server backup and the independent forensic analysis my team completed yesterday, we have a complete evidentiary basis." He looked at me directly. "I want to be transparent with you about the timeline, Mr. Westfield, because you've earned that. This morning I am returning to the field office with this package. My team will spend today completing the affidavits required for 2 federal warrants. The first is a search warrant for Preston Holloway's offices and digital records. The second is an arrest warrant for both Preston Holloway and Vivian Westfield. The room absorbed that sentence in the particular way that rooms absorb sentences that have been anticipated and are still, when they arrive, larger than expected." My hands were flat on the table. I kept them there. "Timeline for execution?" I asked. 24 to 48 hours, Rourke said. "The warrants require a federal judge's signature. Judge Patricia Dunmore has been assigned to this matter. Based on the strength of what you've given me today, I expect signature within 24 hours. He paused. "I would ask that you and Ms. Westfield remain reachable and remain in Chicago. And I would ask that you do not contact Vivian Westfield or Preston Holloway directly between now and the execution of the warrants." "Understood," I said. "Mr. Westfield." Rourke's tone shifted just slightly from procedural to something a degree more personal. "I've been in financial crimes for 17 years. I've worked cases involving significantly larger sums than this one." He looked at the folder stack. "But the quality of the scheme here, The inside access, the document engineering, the legal timing around the divorce, this was constructed by people who understood your systems deeply. That level of access and preparation over 18 months is not common. He held my gaze. I want you to know that we take that seriously. This is not a civil matter that crossed a line. This was a deliberate federal crime planned and executed with sophistication. We will treat it accordingly. Something moved in my chest. Not gratitude exactly, though there was some of that. More like the particular sensation of having something you knew to be true, confirmed by a person whose job it is to evaluate truth without sentiment. Thank you, I said. Rourke nodded. He picked up the document bag now loaded with the 12 folders and turned to his agents. Then he stopped and looked back at the room, at the people assembled around the table in the gray morning light. And something that was not quite a smile moved across his controlled face. One more thing, he said. The email Brett Langley received 3 days ago, the one directing him to deny you access to this hotel, that email originated from a server registered to Preston Holloway's firm, using electronic communication to interfere with access to an asset not covered by a freeze order in furtherance of a conspiracy that is an additional overt act. He looked at me steadily. We will be including it. Beside me, Audrey exhaled slowly through her nose. It was the exhale of a woman who had thought of that connection herself and is relieved to have it confirmed. Rourke and his agents left. Franklin escorted them down. The suite was quiet. Bernard Whitlock uncrossed his legs and leaned forward in his chair. Conrad, he said, when this is resolved, and it will be resolved, the board is going to need to be reconstituted. The members who voted to suspend you acted on fraudulent information. Those votes are legally challengeable. He looked at Theodore and Reginald. The three of us have discussed it. We are prepared to support a petition to the court to invalidate the suspension order on the basis of fraud. Theodore nodded vigorously. We retained outside counsel last week. The filing is ready to go the moment Rourke executes those warrants. Reginald spoke for the first time since he had arrived. His voice was low and measured, each word placed with the care of a man who does not use language carelessly. You built something real, Conrad. Real things deserve to be defended. He held my gaze. We're defending it. My throat closed entirely for a moment. I pressed my lips together, breathed through my nose, and looked at the ceiling for the count of 3. The old technique. The one that has served me in boardrooms and hospital waiting rooms, and every other space where a man needs to hold himself together in public. When I looked back down, Audrey was watching me with an expression that she had stopped trying to make neutral. Her eyes were bright, and her chin was steady, and she looked exactly like what she was, a woman who had carried something impossibly heavy for 3 weeks and could feel for the first time that the weight was beginning to be shared. We're not done yet, I said, addressing the room. My voice was steadier than I felt. But we're close. Owen, from his position near the door, said quietly, whatever you need. For as long as you need it, this room is yours. Through the windows, the gray February morning had brightened another degree. Thin winter sunlight, beginning to push through the cloud cover over the lake, casting pale gold across the water in long, uncertain strips. Uncertain, but there. The suite felt different after Rourke left, not emptier. The people remaining were still present, still carrying the particular energy of a meeting that had accomplished what it set out to accomplish. But the room had released something. The taut, forward-leaning quality of the night's work had softened into the sensation of a breath held for a very long time, beginning cautiously to ease. Bernard, Theodore, and Reginald left together at 8:30. Bernard shook my hand at the door with the grip of a man making a promise rather than a farewell. Theodore gripped my forearm the way Owen had the night before. Reginald paused in the doorway, looked back at me with those steady eyes, and said simply, 48 hours. Then he was gone. Catherine turned to me the moment the door closed. There is something I need to handle this morning, she said, her legal pad in hand. Brett Langley. Tell me your thinking, I said. Under Illinois employment law, I cannot terminate him without due process, a documented investigation, an opportunity for him to respond a formal review. Immediate termination creates wrongful termination exposure. She held my gaze steadily. What I can do is place him on paid administrative leave, effective immediately, pending a full internal investigation. That removes him from operational authority, today protects the hotel legally, and creates the documented record necessary to support termination at the conclusion of the process. That is the right approach, I said. I will conduct the investigation myself, Catherine said. I will review his correspondence with Preston Holloway's firm, his actions regarding your access, and any related communications. The findings will be what they are based on evidence alone. She paused. I want to be clear, this investigation is conducted on the hotel's behalf, not yours. I wouldn't want it any other way, I said. And I meant it completely. She picked up her phone and made the call. Brett appeared in the suite doorway 11 minutes later. He had not slept. His jacket was the same one from the night before, now rumpled, and his face carried the gray quality of a man who had spent the night aware that the ground beneath him was unstable. His eyes moved around the room, and when they landed on me, they held there the residue of the authority he had exercised the previous night. The recognition that the authority was gone and something underneath, both, that might have been shame working hard to disguise itself as indignation. Mr. Langley, Catherine said. Her voice was entirely professional, entirely without cruelty, and entirely without softness. Please come in. Brett stepped inside. Franklin positioned himself in the corridor just outside, visible through the gap, present the way Franklin was always present when presence was necessary. Last night you received an external communication directing you to deny access to a specific individual, Catherine said. You acted on that communication without consulting me, without verifying its legal standing, and without following our established protocol for handling third-party legal correspondence. She looked at him directly. You prioritized an instruction from outside this organization over your obligations to this hotel and to a guest with a legitimate, legally established right of access. She set the legal pad down. I am placing you on paid administrative leave effective immediately pending a full internal investigation. Brett's face flushed. I was following legal advice, he said, his voice unsteady. The email from the firm said, The email was not addressed to you, Catherine said. It was not routed through our legal department. It arrived in your personal work inbox, and you acted on it unilaterally. She held his gaze without flinching. That is not following legal advice. That is a unilateral decision to follow an unsolicited external instruction, one that resulted in the denial of access to a valid reservation on record for 6 years. Brett opened his mouth, then closed it. Your access credentials have been suspended as of this morning, Catherine continued. Please hand your keycard to Franklin on your way out. HR will be in contact regarding the investigation timeline. A pause. That is all, Mr. Langley. Brett stood there for 3 long seconds. One hand at his side had curled into a loose fist, the involuntary grip of a man holding on to something that had already left his hand. Then he turned and walked out. Franklin was there to receive his credentials. The suite door closed. Catherine looked at me. I am sorry, she said, for what happened last night, for the role this hotel played, however unwitting. She held my gaze. It will not happen again. I know it won't, I said. Audrey from across the room looked at me with an expression she had stopped trying to make neutral. Outside the window, thin winter sunlight pushed through the cloud cover over the lake, casting pale gold across the water in long, careful strips. The warrants were coming. The next move belonged to the law. Audrey left at 10:30 to shower and change at her apartment on West Monroe, with instructions that she would be back by 1, and that I was not to do anything consequential in her absence. She said it the way she says most things she means seriously, not as a request, but as a statement of what was going to happen, delivered with the calm certainty of a woman who has learned that framing matters. I told her I would behave. She gave me the look that told me she was filing that statement under claims requiring verification. After she left, the suite was quiet in a way it had not been since I arrived. Owen had gone down to handle the morning's operational demands, the kind that do not pause for personal crises, kitchen deliveries, a staffing issue on the concierge floor, the corporate conference guests who needed coordination for their afternoon sessions. Catherine was in her office 2 floors down, working through the documentation for Brett's administrative leave with the methodical thoroughness she applied to everything. Franklin was in the corridor. I knew this without checking. I stood at the window for a long time. 31 years is not an abstraction. It is a specific accumulation of specific days, each one with its own texture, its own temperature, its own small catalog of moments that seemed ordinary at the time, and only later reveal themselves as the material from which a life is actually made. The first winter in the house on North Burling Street, when the heating system failed in January, and we slept in the living room with every blanket we owned piled on top of us. Laughing at the absurdity of it, 2 people who had between them enough resources to fix the problem immediately, and who chose instead to find it funny. The morning Audrey was born, when I had stood in a hospital corridor with my back against a wall and my eyes closed, not praying exactly, but doing something in the neighborhood of it, something wordless and total, the way a man reaches toward God when the stakes exceed his ability to manage them with language. The Tuesday evenings when Vivian would cook something complicated, and we would eat at the kitchen counter instead of the dining room table because neither of us wanted to be that formal with each other, not at the end of an ordinary Tuesday. When had ordinary Tuesdays stopped? I pressed my palm flat against the glass. It was cold against my skin, the February chill coming through the pane in a way that the hotel's heating could warm the room against, but not entirely overcome. The honest answer, if I was willing to give myself an honest answer, was that I did not know exactly when things had changed. I knew when I had noticed which was different. You can live alongside a thing for a long time before you see it clearly. The human eye has a remarkable capacity for adjusting to gradual changes in light. You do not notice the room getting darker until you can no longer read. What I had noticed about 2 years ago was that Vivian had stopped being curious about the things I was working on. Not disinterested, she had always maintained a surface engagement, asking the right questions at the right moments, offering the kind of attentive responses that pass for genuine interest in a busy marriage. But the curiosity behind the questions had gone somewhere. I had put it down to the natural settling of a long relationship, the way 2 people who know each other well stop needing to ask certain questions because they believe they already know the answers. I had been wrong about what it meant. My phone buzzed on the table behind me. I turned. The message was from Raymond Albright. Backup delivered to Rourke's team at 9:52 a.m. Chain of custody signed and receipted. You're in good shape, Conrad. I set the phone down and looked at it for a moment. Good shape. Raymond had a lawyer's instinct for understatement in written communication, the habit of a man who has spent 4 decades being careful about what he commits to text. Good shape meant this is going to work. A knock at the door. Not Franklin's knock, lighter, more tentative. Come in, I said. The door opened, and Owen stepped inside carrying a plate covered with a cloth napkin. He looked slightly self-conscious, the expression of a man doing something domestic in a context that has been anything but. You haven't eaten, he said. It was not a question. Not since you arrived, which was by my count approximately 10 hours ago. He set the plate on the table and lifted the napkin. Eggs, toast, sliced fruit, a small pot of coffee. Simple, carefully prepared, the kind of breakfast that communicates attention without ostentation. My throat tightened unexpectedly. "Owen," I said. "Don't," he said, holding up one hand, and there was something almost stern in the gesture. The sternness of a man who has decided that gratitude flows in one direction in this room, and it is not toward me. "You saved this building. The least this building can do is feed you breakfast." I sat down at the table. The eggs were still warm. Owen sat across from me, not eating, just present in the comfortable way of a man who has decided that company is what the moment requires. Outside, the February sun had climbed as high as it was going to climb today, which was not very high, its light flat and pale over the lake, doing its honest best with what February allowed. "What happens now?" Owen asked. "After the warrants, after the legal process runs its course, what does Conrad Westfield do next?" I picked up the fork, considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "He builds something," I said. "That's what he's always done." Owen looked at me across the table with an expression that was equal parts admiration and something warmer and less categorizable. The expression of a man who has just heard something he needed to hear without knowing he needed to hear it. "Good," Owen said simply. I ate my breakfast. Outside, Chicago went about its February morning, indifferent and enduring, the way great cities always are, carrying their histories and their present moments, simultaneously making room for both, without needing to resolve the tension between them. The warrants would come. The law would do what the law does. And then on the other side of all of it, there was work to be done. Audrey came back at 1:45, which was 15 minutes earlier than she had said, carrying a fresh briefcase and the particular focused energy of a person who has used a shower and a change of clothes, not for comfort, but for preparation. She set her bag down, looked at the empty breakfast plate on the table, and gave me a brief nod of approval that she clearly did not intend to be as transparent as it was. "Rourke called while I was driving," she said, pulling out her phone and setting it face up on the table between us. "He left a message. I waited to listen until I got here." I pulled my chair around so we were both facing the phone. Audrey pressed play. Rourke's voice came through flat and clear, the voice of a man recording a message with the same economy he brought to everything else. "Ms. Westfield, this is Agent Rourke. As of 1:15 this afternoon, Judge Dunmore has signed the search warrant for Preston Holloway's offices at 330 North Wabash. My team is executing that warrant as of this call. We expect to have preliminary findings from the office search within 4 to 6 hours. I'll be in touch this evening regarding the arrest warrants. Both subjects remain unaware of the investigation's current status." Audrey stopped the recording. The room held that information for a moment. "They're in his office right now," Audrey said. Her voice was steady, but her right hand had pressed flat against the table, the involuntary grounding gesture of a person managing a significant surge of adrenaline. "They're going through everything." "Yes," I said. She exhaled through her nose. "Preston is going to know within the hour. The moment his assistant calls him about federal agents in the building, Rourke's team will have anticipated that," I said. "They'll have someone monitoring his communications from the moment they entered the building. If he tries to move money or contact Vivian, they'll see it." Audrey looked at me. "You're very calm." "I'm not calm," I said honestly. "I've just run out of the kind of energy that panic requires." She almost laughed. It came out as something between a breath and a sound, the involuntary almost laugh of a person who finds something funny against their better judgment. We waited. The afternoon moved the way afternoons move when you are waiting for something that cannot be hurried slowly, with an exaggerated attention to small details that would otherwise go entirely unnoticed. I became aware of the particular sound the suite's ventilation system made, a low, steady hum that was constant and almost musical if you listened to it long enough. Audrey made notes on her legal pad. I read through the server backup index that Raymond had sent as a PDF, not because I needed to, but because my hands required occupation. At 3:20, Owen knocked and came in with 2 cups of tea that neither of us had asked for, and both of us accepted without comment, because Owen Harrelson had a gift for appearing with exactly the right thing at the right time, which is, when you consider it, the foundational skill of everyone who has ever run a great hotel. At 4:07, Audrey's phone rang. "Rourke." She answered and put it on speaker before the second ring had finished. "We've executed the search," Rourke said without preamble. "Preston Holloway's office has been secured. We've seized 4 laptops, 2 external drives, and approximately 300 pages of physical documents. Preliminary review of the digital records confirms the existence of the payment to Garrett Wills, the $400,000 arrangement your daughter identified." A brief pause. "We've also found something additional that wasn't in your original submission." Audrey's pen stopped moving. "There's a second set of forgeries," Rourke said. "Prepared but not yet deployed. They appear to target a different aspect of the Westfield Group's asset structure, specifically the offshore holding company that manages 3 of your international properties. The documents were dated for deployment next month." My hand tightened around the armrest of my chair. "They weren't finished," I said. My voice came out rougher than I intended. "No," Rourke said. "We got there first." Audrey's eyes came up to mine across the table. Her face had gone very still, the stillness of a person processing information that is worse than they expected, and better than it could have been simultaneously. Her chin was steady. Her jaw was set. But her eyes were doing something complicated. The complicated thing they do when she is feeling more than she is willing to show. "The arrest warrants," I said. "Timeline. Judge Dunmore has the affidavits," Rourke said. "Based on what we found this afternoon, I expect signatures by end of business today. Execution tomorrow morning early." Another pause, and in the pause was the weight of a man choosing his next words with care. "Mr. Westfield, I want to prepare you for the fact that tomorrow morning is going to generate significant attention. Federal arrests of this profile with the names involved, it will be public very quickly." "I understand," I said. "Is there anyone you want to notify before it becomes public?" Rourke asked. "Family, close associates, anyone who should hear it from you rather than from a news alert." I thought about that for a moment. The list of people who needed to hear it from me was not long. Bernard Theodore and Reginald already knew. Raymond knew. Owen and Catherine were in this building. There was one person. "Yes," I said. "One person." After Rourke ended the call, Audrey set her phone down and looked at me. "Who?" she asked. I stood up from the table and walked to the window. The afternoon light over the lake had gone to that particular pale gold that February afternoons in Chicago produce in their last hour before the early dark, comes down thin and honest, and quietly beautiful in a way that requires you to look for it, rather than simply receiving it. "My brother," I said. "He lives in Portland. He has been calling me for 4 months, and I have not called him back because I did not want him to hear me when I had nothing to tell him except that I was losing." Audrey's expression softened in a way that she did not try to manage. "Call him," she said. "You have something to tell him now." I picked up my phone. Martin picked up on the 4th ring, which was 1 ring longer than usual, and the slight delay told me he had seen my name on the screen and needed a moment to decide whether the call was real or whether he was misreading it. "Conrad." His voice came through with the particular texture of a man trying to sound unsurprised and not entirely succeeding. Martin Westfield was 64 years old, 4 years my senior, and had spent the better part of his adult life in Portland, running a small architectural firm that designed the kind of buildings he actually believed in. Schools, community centers, affordable housing developments that won awards no one outside the industry had heard of, and that he considered more meaningful than any of them. We were different men who had come from the same place, and the distance between us in recent years had less to do with the miles between Chicago and Portland than with the particular difficulty of maintaining closeness across a gap of lifestyle and priority that neither of us had ever quite found the language to bridge. "Martin," I said, "I owe you 4 months of phone calls." A short pause. You owe me considerably more than that, he said, and his voice had the careful lightness of a man choosing humor, because the alternative is too heavy for an opening line. But 4 months is a reasonable starting point. I sat down on the edge of the window seat, my back to the lake, the room warm around me. Audrey had moved to the far end of the suite to give me privacy, settling into one of the armchairs, with her legal pad close enough to be present, far enough to be absent. I need to tell you what's been happening, I said. The real version, not the version that's been in the financial press. I've been reading the financial press for 4 months, Martin said. And now the lightness was gone, replaced by something that had clearly been waiting beneath it. I've been calling you for 4 months. I want to hear the real version, Conrad. I've wanted it since October. So I told him. Not the legal architecture of it, not the evidentiary structure, not the timeline of documents and warrants and server backups. I told him the human version, the one that had no procedural framework to organize it, and no professional language to make it manageable. I told him about standing in the lobby of Westfield Tower, watching my keycard blink red. I told him about the process server with the face that had forgotten how to feel. I told him about 4 months of waking up in a rented apartment, 2 miles from a house that still had my furniture in it, surrounded by the specific silence of a life that has been emptied of its habitual sounds. Martin did not interrupt. This was one of the things I had always valued in him, a quality he had developed over decades of listening to clients describe what they needed from a building. The discipline of receiving what someone is actually saying, rather than the version you have already begun constructing a response to. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. That was not the uncomfortable silence of a person who has nothing to say, but the full silence of a person who has too much and is selecting carefully. She used the access codes from your own system, he said finally. She used what you gave her, Conrad, what you gave her because you trusted her. Yes, I said. That's the part that's going to take the longest, Martin said. His voice was rough at the edges now, the roughness of a man feeling something on behalf of someone he loves. Not the legal part, not the financial part, the part where you gave someone your codes. My throat closed briefly. I pressed my hand against my sternum. I know, I said. Are you all right? He asked. Direct the way Martin asks the things he actually wants to know without wrapping them in softer questions first. Not entirely, I said. But I'm better than I was yesterday, and tomorrow the warrants execute. Where are you? The Grand Pinnacle, Chicago. A pause. The hotel you saved, he said slowly. And then, with the particular quality of a man arriving at an understanding that shifts something, you went there. Of all the places you could have gone, you went there. It was the right place, I said. Martin made a sound that was low and unsteady, the sound a man makes when emotion catches him somewhere he was not expecting it. You always did that, he said, and his voice had gone somewhere older, somewhere that reached back past the last decade of distance between us. Even when we were kids. When something went wrong, you went somewhere that meant something. You never just went somewhere convenient. My eyes burned unexpectedly. I pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of my nose and breathed through it, that old technique, the count of 3. Martin, I said when I trusted my voice again. After this is over, the legal process, the board, all of it, I'd like you to come to Chicago. Tell me when, he said immediately, without hesitation, without the negotiation of schedules and timing that such invitations usually require. Just tell me when. I'll call you tomorrow, I said, after the warrants execute. I'll be waiting, he said. Then after a brief pause, Conrad, you built something real. They tried to take it with paper and lies, and they didn't get it. Not the part that matters. I looked across the room at Audrey, who was not looking at her legal pad at all, but at me, her pen still in her hand, her expression carrying everything she had chosen not to say. During the last 2 days, distilled into a single look that contained more than most conversations manage. No, I said. They didn't get that part. I ended the call. The suite was warm and quiet, and outside the window behind me, the last of the February afternoon light was fading over the lake, the pale gold going to amber, going to the deep blue that comes just before dark, each color giving way to the next, with the unhurried certainty of things that have been doing this long enough to have no doubt about the sequence. Tomorrow the warrants. Tonight, I was going to sleep for the first time in 4 months without the particular weight out of a man who has no move left to make. I slept 7 hours, which was more than I had slept in a single night since October. When I woke, the room was still dark, the lake outside the window, a flat, black presence beyond the glass. The city lights along the shoreline doing their quiet work of holding back the dark from the edges. I lay still for a moment, oriented myself to the ceiling of a room I had owned for 6 years and slept in for 1 night, and felt the particular quality of a morning that is going to be different from the mornings that came before it. My phone was on the nightstand. 6:22 a.m. No missed calls yet. I dressed slowly, made coffee from the sweets machine, and stood at the window with the cup in both hands, while the city outside began its early preparations for the day. The lake was still dark, but the sky above it had started its gradual shift, the deep black pulling back from the eastern horizon, to reveal the dark blue underneath, then the gray, the sequence of colors that every morning runs through on its way to whatever it is going to be. At 6:41 the phone rang. Rourke, Mr. Westfield. His voice was level and unhurried. Both warrants were executed this morning. Preston Holloway was taken into custody at his residence in Lincoln Park at 6:05 a.m. Vivian Westfield was taken into custody at the residence on North Burling Street at 6:17 a.m. A brief pause. Both individuals are currently being processed at the federal building on West Roosevelt Road. They will appear before a federal magistrate for arraignment within 48 hours. I set the coffee cup down on the windowsill. My hands were steadier than I expected them to be, steadier than they had been on the night I picked up the process server's envelope in my office, steadier than they had been watching my keycard blink red in the lobby of my own building. Any complications during the arrests? I asked. None, Rourke said. Both subjects were cooperative. Mr. Holloway's attorney arrived at the federal building within 20 minutes of custody, which suggests he had been retained in advance for this specific contingency. A pause that contained a professional's dry assessment. That level of preparation tends to indicate awareness of exposure. It will not help him. And Vivian's attorney, she invoked her right to counsel immediately. An attorney from Hargrove and Pell arrived within the hour. Rourke's voice remained neutral. I want to manage your expectations regarding timeline, Mr. Westfield. Federal cases of this complexity move slowly. Arraignment, bail determination, discovery, pre-trial motions. We are likely looking at 12 to 18 months before trial, assuming no plea agreement. I understand, I said. The freeze order on your personal assets will be challenged by your attorney through a motion to vacate on the grounds that the underlying allegations were fraudulent. Based on the evidence, I expect that motion to succeed, but it will take 4 to 6 weeks to work through the court calendar. 4 to 6 weeks. After 4 months, 4 to 6 weeks felt like a manageable distance. Thank you, Agent Rourke, I said. Do your work, Mr. Westfield, he said. That's all. And the line closed. I turned from the window. Audrey was standing in the doorway between the suite's bedroom and living area. She had clearly been awake for some time, dressed already, her hair pulled back, her phone in her hand. She had heard enough from my side of the call to understand what had happened, and her face was doing the complicated thing it does when an outcome that has been worked toward for weeks finally arrives and turns out to be real rather than theoretical. Her chin dropped. Her jaw worked once. Then her eyes filled not with the contained brightness of the last 2 days, but fully the way eyes fill when a person has been holding something back for so long that the moment of release exceeds the capacity of any controlled response. They got them. she said. Her voice broke on the last word, cracked open cleanly, the way a voice breaks when it has been kept together through sheer will for 3 weeks, and the will has just been given permission to rest. They got them, I said. She crossed the room, and I put both arms around her, and she pressed her face against my shoulder, the way she had not done since she was a child, and her shoulders shook once, twice the shaking of a person, releasing something enormous through the only outlet available. I held on and did not say anything, because there was nothing to say that was more useful than simply being there, the one form of communication that does not require language and cannot be substituted with anything that does. After a moment, she straightened up, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, a quick practical gesture, took a breath. Raymond needs to file the motion to vacate today, she said, her lawyer's voice returning before the last trace of tears had cleared. The sooner we get the freeze lifted, the sooner we can begin the board challenge. I'll call him at 8, I said. She nodded. Then she looked at me with an expression that had everything in it: the 3 weeks of investigation, the 11 days of believing the wrong thing, the 40-minute drive through February rain, with a bag full of evidence, the night at the table with the folders, the moment by the window when she had taken my hand. Dad, she said. Just that. The word that contains everything a daughter means when she looks at her father and finds him still standing. I know, I said. Outside, the February morning had arrived in full, the sky above the lake gone from gray to pale white, the sun somewhere behind the clouds, making its presence known without showing itself directly, the way it does in winter, diffuse and determined, lighting the world, without heat but lighting it nonetheless. The warrants had been executed. The next move was the courts, and somewhere in the 48 floors of this building, a room on the 34th floor had been waiting 6 years for exactly this morning. I checked out at 9 o'clock. Not because the suite was no longer available to me. Owen had made clear the night before that the room was mine for as long as I needed it, with the sincerity of a man who meant every word of it. But there is a particular discipline in knowing when a place has given you what it has to give. The Grand Pinnacle had sheltered me through the night I needed sheltering most. What came next required a different kind of space. Audrey had left 40 minutes earlier to meet Raymond Albright at his office on North LaSalle Street, where the two of them would spend the morning preparing the motion to vacate the freeze order. She had hugged me at the suite door with both arms and held on for 3 full seconds, which from Audrey is the equivalent of a much longer declaration. And then she had straightened her coat and walked to the elevator with the purposeful stride of a woman who has somewhere important to be. I packed nothing because I had arrived with nothing. I took my coat from the chair where I had draped it the night before, checked that the black card was in my inside pocket, and stood in the center of the suite for a moment, looking at the table where 12 folders had spent the night, and the windows where the February morning was doing its pale, honest best. Then I walked to the door. Owen was in the corridor. He was not there by accident. He was standing outside Suite 3401 the way a person stands in a place when they have decided that being there matters regardless of whether there is any practical reason for it. He was holding his reading glasses in one hand, and when I stepped out of the suite, he straightened up and looked at me with the open, undefended expression of a man who has stopped trying to make his face say less than he feels. "You're leaving," he said. "For now," I said. He nodded slowly, turning the glasses over in his hand once. "The suite," he said. "The reservation stands. It always will." He paused. "But I want you to know something, Conrad. The clause in the agreement says the room is reserved for the silent guardian." He looked at me steadily. "You don't have to be silent anymore." My throat tightened in a way I had not anticipated. I pressed my lips together briefly and breathed through it. "Thank you, Owen," I said. "For the room, for the breakfast, for sitting at that table at 2 in the morning when you had every reason to be somewhere else." Owen's eyes went red at the rims. He pressed his lips together hard, fighting it with visible effort, the effort of a man who has held things together in professional settings for 40 years and is finding the habit difficult to override. "You saved my building," he said, his voice rough at the edges. "Everything that happened in this hotel last night. Every good thing started in March 2019, when you picked up a phone and decided this place was worth saving." He exhaled unevenly. "I spent 6 years wanting to thank you. So, thank you." I gripped his hand. Not a handshake. The grip that means something more than a handshake means the grip of two men standing on either side of a significant thing and acknowledging it without needing to name it completely. He gripped back. We held on for a moment. Then I released and turned toward the elevator. Franklin was at the end of the corridor, beside the elevator doors, standing with the straight-backed composure that was simply how he existed in the world. He had retrieved my coat's second button from somewhere it had come loose the night before in the lobby I had not noticed until now, and he held it out as I approached a small brass button on his open palm. I looked at it, then at him. "You found that," I said. "Lobby floor," Franklin said. "Around 11:30 last night. I picked it up because I thought you might want it back." I took it from his palm and closed my fingers around it. A coat button. The smallest possible object. And yet standing in that corridor with Franklin Greer looking at me with the steady, loyal attention of a man who had held a black card in a security safe for 2 years and picked up a coat button off a lobby floor because he thought the owner might want it back, I felt something move through my chest that had no name precise enough to be useful. "Franklin," I said. My voice came out low and uneven, rougher than I intended. "When this is over, when the board is reconstituted and the group is restored, I'm going to need a head of security. Someone I can trust completely." Franklin's expression did not change dramatically, but something in his eyes shifted, a warmth coming into them that his professional composure could not entirely contain. "I'd want to know the dental plan," he said. I laughed. It came out sudden and genuine, the kind of laugh that arrives without permission and feels in the moment of its arrival, like the most useful thing a person can do. Franklin's mouth moved into something that was unmistakably a smile, controlled and brief, the smile of a man who deployed humor rarely and therefore accurately. The elevator opened. I stepped inside, turned to face the corridor. Owen was still standing outside the suite door, his glasses in his hand. Franklin was beside the elevator, hands clasped in front of him, the stance of a man completing a shift with everything in order. The doors began to close. "Take care of this building," I said. "Always have," Franklin said. The doors closed. The elevator descended. When it opened on the ground floor, the lobby of the Grand Pinnacle spread out in front of me, the marble floor catching the morning light from the tall windows. The fireplace unlit at this hour, but still the anchor of the space, the brass clock above the elevator bank, reading 9:07. Cassidy Holbrook was behind the front desk. She saw me cross the lobby, and her face went through several things in quick succession, none of them comfortable. I did not stop. I did not look away. I simply walked across the marble floor with the full, unhurried attention of a man who knows exactly where he is and exactly who he is, and pushed through the revolving door into the February morning. The cold hit my face like a clean hand. East Superior Street was alive with morning traffic, the city already in full motion, taxis and delivery trucks and people moving with the specific, purposeful energy of a Chicago winter morning, heads down against the wind off the lake, moving fast, because the cold demands it. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and breathed it all in. The work ahead was considerable. The motion to vacate, the board challenge, the process of rebuilding what had been deliberately dismantled. None of it was going to be fast or simple or without cost. But I was standing on a sidewalk in Chicago in February with a coat button in my pocket and a black card against my chest, and for the first time in 4 months, the ground beneath my feet felt entirely solid. I turned north on East Superior Street and started walking. 3 months is both a long time and no time at all, depending on what fills it. What filled those 3 months was work. The motion to vacate the freeze order landed on Judge Dunmore's desk on February 21st, supported by Raymond Albright's complete evidentiary package and a supplementary brief that Audrey wrote in 4 days, and that Raymond later told me was the sharpest piece of legal writing he had seen in a decade. The judge signed the order lifting the freeze on March 14th. I remember the exact date because Raymond called me while I was eating lunch at a diner on North Clark Street, and I sat in that booth for a full minute after the call ended, holding a coffee cup and looking at the salt shaker in front of me as though it were suddenly the most interesting object in the world. The board challenge came next. Bernard Whitlock filed the petition on March 18th, supported by Theodore Marsh and Reginald Foss, arguing that the board's suspension vote had been taken on the basis of fraudulent information and was therefore legally void. The 3 board members who had voted most aggressively for suspension retained outside counsel and attempted to resist the petition. Their resistance lasted 11 days before their own attorneys advised them that the evidentiary position was indefensible. The suspension order was vacated on April 9th. I walked back into Westfield Tower on April 10th, took the elevator to the 42nd floor, and found that my office had been left exactly as it was on the October morning when the process server had been waiting inside it. Someone had kept it clean. I never found out who. I suspected it was Raymond, and I suspected he would deny it if asked, so I did not ask. Garrett Wills, the forensic document specialist in Atlanta, who had taken Preston's money to build the forgeries, reached a cooperation agreement with the federal prosecutors in late March. In exchange for his full testimony regarding the scheme's construction and Preston's direction of it, Wills received a suspended sentence and 3 years of supervised probation. His cooperation provided the prosecution with the technical detail that made the evidentiary case against Preston essentially unassailable. Preston Holloway entered a not guilty plea at his arraignment and retained a team of 4 defense attorneys from a firm in New York that specialized in white-collar federal cases. The preliminary hearing was set for August. Raymond told me with the professional understatement that was his native language that Preston's legal team would find the evidence environment challenging. Vivienne was different. On May 6th, her attorney contacted the federal prosecutor's office with a proffer, an offer to enter into plea negotiations. I learned about it from Rourke, who called me on a Tuesday afternoon with the same flat, measured voice he used for everything, as though the emotional weight of what he was conveying were simply not a variable he was equipped to adjust for. "She's going to plead," Rourke said. "The terms are still being negotiated, but the direction is clear. The evidence against her is significant enough that her counsel has advised against trial." I was standing at the window in my office on the 42nd floor when he told me. My office window faces west toward the city rather than the lake, and I looked out at the Chicago skyline in the May afternoon light. All those buildings rising above the grid of streets, each one built by someone who believed something was worth building. "What are the expected terms?" I asked. "The prosecution is seeking 30 months restitution of $4.7 million, representing her share of the financial benefit derived from the scheme and forfeiture of assets acquired in the period of the conspiracy," Rourke said. "Her attorneys are pushing for 18 months. The negotiation will likely settle somewhere in the middle. 30 months, 18 months, somewhere in the middle." I had not expected to feel what I felt in that moment. I had expected clarity, the clean satisfaction of a conclusion reached after considerable effort. What I felt instead was something more complicated and harder to name, the particular heaviness of watching something that was once real and good arrive at an end that confirms it was corrupted long before it ended. 31 years does not disappear because a judge signs a plea agreement. It becomes something else, something smaller and more painful and more honest. "Thank you, Rourke," I said. I called Audrey immediately after. She answered on the first ring, which meant she had been waiting. "I heard," she said before I could speak. "Raymond just called me." "How are you?" I asked. A pause. "Relieved," she said carefully, "and sad. Both at the same time, which I know doesn't entirely make sense." "It makes complete sense," I said. She exhaled slowly. "The divorce proceedings will move faster now that the criminal matter has direction. Raymond thinks the asset division will be resolved within 60 days of the plea agreement being finalized." "The house?" I asked. "The deed transfer will be unwound as part of the asset division," Audrey said. "It was executed during the period of the conspiracy and is subject to clawback." A brief pause. "You can have it back, Dad, if you want it." I thought about the house on North Burling Street. The floors I had refinished on my hands and knees. The kitchen painted warm ivory. The ordinary Tuesdays. What remained of all of that was the structure, the rooms, the light through the front windows in the afternoon. The life that had been lived inside it was already mine, untransferable, regardless of whose name appeared on the deed. "I'll think about it," I said honestly. Across town in a federal building on West Roosevelt Road, the legal machinery that had been set in motion on a February night in a hotel lobby was grinding forward with the slow, implacable certainty of institutions that exist precisely because individuals cannot always be trusted to deliver justice to themselves. It was not fast. It was not clean. It was not the kind of resolution that fits neatly into a single moment. But it was real, and it was moving in the right direction. That I had learned is sometimes the most you can ask for.